Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu returns to court as the corruption trial against him resumes. Meanwhile, cabinet ministers fail to come to any decision as coronavirus continues wreaking havoc across the country. And finally, United States President Biden drawing hard lines in the sand with Tehran. The day has come. With just a little over a month to go before elections in Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is now returning to court as his corruption trials resume. Security in Jerusalem on high, and protesters chanting loudly enough from the streets to be heard inside the courthouse. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu entering a plea of not guilty. The first Israeli prime minister to be indicted while in office, Netanyahu is facing 3 different cases of corruption, including charges of bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. But the 71-year-old premier is holding strong to assertions that the charges against him are politically motivated and false.
כולם כבר רואים שמסע הציד נגדי מתפורר. כולם מבינים שזהו ניסיון שקוף להפיל ראש ממשלה חזק מהימין ובכך להמליך ממשלת שמאל בראשות לפיד. כולם גם מבינים שמסע הציד הזה כולל סחיטה באיומים של עדים, טיוח חקירות, המצאת עבירות שלא קיימות בשום מדינה בעולם, פתיחת חקירות נגד ראש ממשלה ללא אישור היועץ המשפטי וניגודי עניינים מכאן עד קפריסין. ולכן הניסיון הזה ייכשל.
Still, regardless of political motivations or screw-ups and controversies in the investigations, the charges in cases 1000, 2000, and 4000 are quite serious, accusing Netanyahu of allegedly accepting improper gifts and engaging in illegal quid pro quo agreements with various media moguls. Demonstrators outside the courthouse, many dressed as street-cleaning prison inmates, calling for a cleanup in government.
Well, they came to wipe the corruption from the streets of Israel, and they're doing quite a nice job. 8 months ago, they came here, and ever since then, they're here, and they say that they're not going to leave until he's going to leave.
Well, as for what comes next, Netanyahu has already received permission from the judges to be excused from sitting in court, allowing his defense team to represent him in his absence today. But as trial moves forwards, he may be required to appear at least multiple times a week, while simultaneously having to keep up with his election campaign and ministerial duties. Here now with more on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's return to trial in Jerusalem. We have expert on Israeli criminal law, Sharon Nahari. Sharon, thank you so much for being with us. Now, in short, what unfolded today in the courtroom?
Yeah, actually, Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister, gave his first non-guilty for the judges in writing, which saying that exactly each clause of the indictment, what is exactly his statement, and he said that he's not guilty, and the trial is starting soon.
Is the prosecution's case, as Netanyahu argues, actually crumbling?
No, I think it's very, very early to say this. Crumbling, it's a hard word, you know. I don't think it started to crumbling because the trial is not started yet. You know, we see a lot of comments.
But there were a lot of those, you know,
months.
Sure.
Exactly, yeah. There was a lot of rumors and, people that saying things, ex-judges, ex-lawyers, etc. But we really don't know how the witness will come to court. I want you to explain to the public that in the file there, this is all the statements, but we don't know how the witness will come and give the statement in the court, which is very, very different sometimes from the statement they gave in the police station on the papers, you know. It's different, and we need to see how the judge, what the judge think about the witness when he go to give his statement in the court, especially when we talk about state witness, which is in the case with Netanyahu case. Yeah, there are few.
Sure. So what comes next then? What's the order of the cases? How many witnesses are there? What is Netanyahu's schedule going to be like?
The schedule is the prosecution first need to have all the witness in the court, they give the testimony in the court, which take a long time because there are many witnesses, and the part of them are the state witness, which is long cross investigation for the lawyers. After that, it will be finished. I think will take 1 or 2 years. But after this, the defendant can say no case to answer, which is before the defendant go to give the statement. No case to answer means that even everything we hear till now, there is nothing. There is no offense, a criminal offense, and then the court need to give Netanyahu a final decision if he need to answer and for what offenses he need to answer. Maybe he can acquit him from some of the offenses. If no, he need to answer, and then he need to go to the state to give the statement in the court. And after, there are all the defense from the witness from the defense side. After that is the summary, and then the judges need to give the final decision. And if he's guilty, verdict. If he's acquitted,
well, all right.
This will be the case.
Well, it sounds like we have a lot to look forward to over the next coming years, as you said.
Yes.
Sharon, thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you very much.
All right, now with elections in mind, Likud party members are scrambling to postpone Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's trial until after March elections. They argue that it wouldn't be fair, as only the prosecution's case will be presented by that time. But calls to postpone have all been thrown out, with other party heads like Benny Gantz and Gideon Sa'ar praising how all citizens are equally subject to the justice system, while calling on politicians not to get involved. Now, meanwhile, putting the trial aside, the election committee has confirmed party listings ahead of the vote on March 23. But no real surprise changes or mergers have been reported. The latest polls predicting Netanyahu's Likud as remaining the largest party with 30 seats, followed by 18 for Yesh Atid, 14 for New Hope, 11 for Yamina, 8 each for the Joint Arab List and the religious Shas Party, 7 each for the religious United Torah Judaism Party and the secular Israel Beitenu, and 5 seats for Labor. Then finally at the bottom, just barely passing the electoral threshold with 4 seats each, there is the Blue and White Party and the Religious Zionist Party and Meretz. Neither left nor right-wing blocs, however, have cleared a path to a 61-seat majority coalition. Moving on, Israel's ongoing conflict with coronavirus is hitting yet another snag. Major Israeli broadcast networks airing leaked arguments from last Thursday's cabinet meeting, revealing stalemates along party lines and no clear agreement as to how to get the country out of extended coronavirus lockdowns. Hannah Rifkin reports.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Benny Gantz heard yelling at one another in a recording leaked to major news networks and aired overnight Sunday. Netanyahu in the audio telling Gantz that the blood of many Israelis will be on his hands if the economy reopens too quickly. Gantz and his party, for their part, opposing lockdown extensions and proposing the conditioning of any extensions on the doubling of fines for violations. And the defense minister later charging that Netanyahu is throwing dust in the public's eyes, adding that the leaked recordings themselves also likely came from Netanyahu's own office. But whatever the reason, the cabinet is still failing to release a comprehensive exit plan. And the latest cabinet meeting Sunday night ending without any new decisions either way, allowing many restrictions to expire, including the closure of businesses with individual interactions, like hairdressers, and a lifting of restrictions for businesses and travel that do not serve the public. But many other closures, meantime, are set to continue, like the shuttering of schools and shopping outlets. Ministers now proposing a return to classrooms Tuesday, but not necessarily in person, and not necessarily for every grade in every city. Prime Minister Netanyahu adding adamantly that we are still in the thick of the pandemic.
אנחנו עדיין בעיצומו של מרוץ צמוד בין מבצע החיסונים שלנו חוזרים לחיים לבין התפשטות המוטציה הבריטית שמתפשטת בארץ כמו בכל העולם. היעד שלנו הוא לחסן 95% מאלה שמעל גיל 50. במקביל, אנחנו התחלנו הבוקר את השלב הראשון של היציאה המודרגת מהסגר עם ביטול מספר מגבלות. אני מבקש להדגיש, ההקלה בסגר אינה אומרת שהעלייה בתחלואה היא מאחורינו. אסור לנו להיכנס לשאננות, אסור לנו לפעול בחוסר אחריות. אחרת התחלואה פשוט תעלה, תגבה מחירים עצומים, גם בחיים, הרבה מאוד אנשים שיקפחו את חייהם, וגם בחולים קשים, דבר שיקריס את המערכת.
But that said, amidst a widening national deficit now reaching 166.4 billion shekels, several malls and chain stores across the country are still reopening despite restrictions, and many simply adopting a restaurant-style takeout model to do so, arguing that the closures have been discriminatory from the start. And this as thousands of ultra-Orthodox Israelis flood into Bnei Brak Sunday night for a funeral procession honoring a senior rabbi who himself had died of complications from coronavirus. Videos from the event showing police helplessly looking on as funeral goers remove roadblocks and occasionally clash with government enforcement. Meanwhile, the infection rate persisting at a dangerous 9%. Active infections in Israel now hitting upwards of 67,600, the majority of which come from the UK variant. And the death toll is at least 5,129.
On a related note, especially in light of the pandemic, many across the globe have been hit with terrible life or death health dilemmas, either for themselves or for their loved ones. And often there's no real guidance for what to do. But thankfully, there is now a qualified hotline providing some ethical advice. And joining me now to tell us all about it is Director of Tzohar's Center for Jewish Ethics, Rabbi Yuval Cherlo. Rabbi, thank you so much for being with us. Now, this is advice based on Jewish halachic principles. What does that mean exactly?
The main idea in Jewish halachic ethical approach is the fact that you have to balance between all kind of measures. One is the importance of keeping your life and continuing your life. It's a responsibility. We were created in God's image, and we have to keep it. From the other hand, you have to conduct or predict normal life, and you have to make all kinds of decisions, especially when you are in the end of the life, and there are a lot of dilemmas. If to use the ventilator, if to what treaty you should make with the doctors, with the all your relatives. This is the main idea, and we give the advice from the halachic point of view and from the ethical point of view.
But so that being said, is this hotline only for Jews then?
The truth is that yes, but actually, and in fact, we have got some calls from the Arab society because of two reasons. First of all, we are kind of a mediator for the families that can explain, that staff in the hospital is so busy, is so under pressure, can't function like in regular days where you can explain to the family everything. And we know the job, and we are quite good mediators between the family and the staff. The second reason why Arabs also call us is the fact that ethics is many times a global issue. It's an international issue. There are special points in Jewish ethics, but there are also something in the common with all the people in the world. So therefore, when they realize that we can give ethical advice, even though it's not halachic, they're not Jews, they call us, and it's very interesting. It breaks walls, because one of the main things that can unify all human beings is ethics.
So how did this hotline begin, and what is the success rate, if you could call it that, of the hotline's advice?
It started with the fact that we as rabbis get more and more questions, because actually the medicine succeeded. And it's a big victory of the medicine that we live much longer. The problem is that when we live much longer, there is a gap between the body and the brain. Sometimes the brain functions, but the body is a kind of a traitor, we call it. Sometimes the opposite. The body is completely okay, but the brain is in dimension. And as rabbis, and I work in many ethical committees in hospitals, we started to get all kinds of questions. Are we, must we continue fight for our relatives' life, or this is the time to say enough is enough? So after I personally gave so many advices, we decided to make a hotline to train rabbis and social workers to give the right answers. And we began a few weeks ago, and the numbers are increasing, not only connected to the COVID-19 virus.
Wow.
It's connected to all of us will get to this point.
All right, well, Rabbi, I want to thank you for doing this tough work, and I want to implore anyone who's looking for any sort of advice, ethically speaking, call the hotline. Rabbi, thanks again for being with us.
Thank you very much, and hopefully all of us, rak briut, as we say, be well.
In other news, Israel is still putting all of its efforts into a speedy vaccination campaign, offering free vaccinations in every city for anyone over the age of 16. And this is even including all foreign nationals of eligible age, with the goal being to vaccinate every adult in Israel by the end of March. But despite this accessibility, the campaign is in danger, with a recently sharp fall in participation. At the start of the campaign, between 100,000 and 120,000 people were getting vaccinated every day, whereas now centers are barely reaching half of these figures. And top health ministry officials are blaming online fake news campaigns for spreading baseless allegations that the vaccine is harmful. One Facebook group, now removed for violating community standards, had even been urging its thousands of followers to schedule vaccine appointments just to cancel them at the last minute and force HMOs to throw out the expiring doses. But even without the fake news, health officials are raising fears that Israel will never reach herd immunity, saying that we'd be lucky to even get 70% of the population vaccinated, far below the 90% assumed necessary. And this as the vaccine cannot be given to anyone under 16 years old, which accounts for upwards of 28% of the public. So is it true? Is herd immunity a hopeless pipe dream? And if so, what then? Well, here to help us answer that question is Professor Cyril Cohen, head of the immunotherapy lab at Bar-Ilan University. Professor Cohen, thank you so much for being with us. Now, so is there truth to these studies that we cannot ever reach herd immunity? And if that's the case, what are our options?
So good evening. I would like to say first that herd immunity is not a black and white notion, meaning that I would say the notion of herd immunity means that the disease starts to shrink, okay? This is a point where we have enough people that have been either vaccinated or that were exposed and got better after the disease. The virus cannot spread anymore. Therefore, I would say like that. Vaccination is very important to lower, I would say, the symptoms and the disease in the population. The other way I would say that we'll get to what we call herd immunity is by having people that are not vaccinated exposed to the virus. So now it's much more, I would say, simple if we're talking about young people that are not really affected the same way as older people, because I have to remind to you that around 90% of the 70-year-old and above that are really, I would say, vaccinated today in Israel. So we are hoping that this will help them to get better. And in the meantime, the virus will circulate in the population.
All right, well, so I think most people would agree that the virus circulating and gaining a natural immunity is probably the worst option, as opposed to just getting vaccinated and avoiding any sort of infection. So if that's the case, to get to that point, because as you said, it's not a black and white, but to get to the point where the infection rate is dropping markedly, is 70%, which is everyone over 16 in Israel, is 70% of the population getting inoculated enough?
It will be gradual. It will be gradual. I think that the scenario we will see in the next few weeks is that we will still see some high level of contamination cases in the population. But on the other hand, since most of the people at risk will be protected, we see a decrease in severe cases in hospitals. And that's what we are, I think that's what we're going to see. And this is actually a situation that is that can remind us from what we see with the flu or other endemic infections.
All right, now I know that we've talked on the show of the supposed cure discovered in Israeli hospitals. It's now finishing first-stage trials. Is that an option going forward to aid in getting to herd immunity or some sort of herd immunity?
So these are two different things. You know, on the one hand, you have what we call protection, and this is what the vaccines are doing, protecting healthy people from contracting the disease. And on the other, you have treatment. And treatment, for example, like that treatment is very interesting. Basically, it's not an antiviral treatment, but it's something that can help in case of severe disease. And it can lower, I would say, the severity of the disease and help you recover much faster. So this is akin to, for example, what we have seen, steroids or other treatments that can help you control better the inflammation in your lungs. So again, this will help, but not in terms of herd immunity. This is a treatment.
All right, Professor Cohen, thank you so much. And just to wrap it up, please go and get vaccinated, everybody watching at home. Again, Professor, thank you.
I agree. Thank you.
Now, much to the pleasant surprise of many skeptics in the Middle East, the new United States administration is appearing to draw a firm line in the sand with Iran. President Joe Biden is refusing, at least for now, to bend to the demands of Tehran. Biden telling CBS News on Sunday that the White House will refuse to lift sanctions on Iran until the Islamic Republic first resumes compliance under the 2015 JCPOA nuclear deal. And this including stopping the enrichment of uranium above 3.5%. While Israeli ambassador to the U.S. Gilad Erdan is already among the first to praise Biden's stance, saying that it's a step in the right direction, but that it's still a mistake to ultimately return to the JCPOA at all, especially as France points to Iran's continued advancement of intercontinental ballistic missiles, and as the UN's International Atomic Energy Agency is now revealing that it found traces of radioactive material consistent with work on nuclear weapons in Iran. So the question then is whether or not Biden will continue to hold strong with this negotiation leverage or fold in favor of signing a deal as he promised on the campaign trail. Meanwhile, fulfilling a different campaign promise, United States officials in Geneva are announcing Washington's planned return to the UN Human Rights Council, President Trump having withdrawn from the highly criticized body in 2018 for its continuing and disproportionate focus on Israel, as well as its failure to adopt a number of reforms, like reform in the body's membership guidelines that allow human rights abusers like China, Cuba, Eritrea, and Venezuela to sit on the panel and guide policy in the first place. Biden officials, on the other hand, are returning to the dogma of trying to change the council from within, with hopes of regaining full membership status in elections for the council later this year. Speaking of international dialogue, Israel has now approved of a major arms deal with the United States to resupply its Air Force. And the lucrative purchase announced on Sunday is including new fighter jets, helicopters, refueling planes, thousands of bombs and munitions, and more. But this decision comes on the heels of a 3-year-long dispute between the Israeli Defense Ministry and Finance Ministry, with the Finance Ministry opposing the deal over budgetary concerns. This because while much of the funding comes from the United States' aid to Israel, the deal will still cost Israel roughly $60 million out of pocket. And the aircraft deal is just one part of a multi-year plan for the IDF. And finally, helping Israeli authorities crack down on travel during the pandemic, a stealthy cat has now been spotted taking measures into its own paws. The feline somehow sneaking into a locked aircraft's cockpit, scratching up the interior and grounding the plane for the time being. Thankfully, though, none taking the security breach too seriously. Journalist Itai Blumenthal tweeting a photo of the adorable cat enjoying the view from the pilot's window. And now let's take a look at the weather forecast. First, you can expect clear to partly cloudy skies tonight with lows around 56 degrees Fahrenheit or 13 degrees Celsius. Then tomorrow should be nice and sunny with temperatures rising to a comfortable high of about 75 degrees Fahrenheit or 24 degrees Celsius. And now before we go, let's take a look at what's going viral in Israel. Here's a video I think that we hardly ever see. Israeli security forces, police, helping the elderly climb a steep hill in Jerusalem. All right, and that is it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.29 shekels to the American dollar and 2.57 shekels to the Canadian dollar. And for more news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Then don't forget to visit the all-new and improved ILTV website at iltv.tv and subscribe to our newsletter for the latest updates while you're there. I'm Aaron Porras. Thank you so much for watching.